One of the many side series that Big Finish have done that has had quite a lot of success over the past few years is their Torchwood Soho series. So I have not covered any of these before because I don't really like reviewing box sets which have some prerequisite or like quite deep into an ongoing story with ongoing characters that I don't have the foggiest like knowledge of. But I decided to make an exception for this latest installment, Torchwood Soho Ascension. So a brief like TARDIS wiki primer is that Torchwood Soho is set in the 1950s, and Sergeant Andy Davidson, played by Tom Price, found his way back into the 1950s through some time travel shenanigans, and the Torchwood Soho series primarily focuses on Norton Folgate, who's played by Samuel Barnett. He's also part of Torchwood with Lisbeth Hayhoe, played by Dervla Kirwan. We've got Gideon Lime here on the left here, played by Joe Shire, and essentially Norton Folgate is this incredibly brilliant super genius who is incredibly egotistical and betrays everybody around him. That's the sort of need-to-know stuff about Torchwood Soho, but I want to emphasise that I had not listened to any of these box sets beforehand. I've not listened to any episodes. I know nothing about any of this. So imagine my surprise when I'm listening to Torchwood Soho Ascension, and despite not knowing any of these characters with the exception of PC Andy, who's in the 1950s and is probably the most normal person here, that Torchwood Soho Ascension wound up being possibly my favourite Big Finish box set of 2024 so far. So essentially, Soho Ascension opens with a plane crash on Heathrow runway where a bunch of evangelicals have gathered on the runway and are convinced that they're going to ascend into heaven during the end of this ceremony. A plane crashes and, it hits all of them, but there's no bodies to be found. There's only some weird coal-like substance that has been left behind from all these people who have supposedly ascended to heaven. You've got this preacher, Father Dinsdale, played by Jamie Bowhan, who is leading these ascensions across all of London, which later start spreading internationally, where people supposedly ascend into big beams of light and nobody has any idea what happens to them on the other side, if they really are going to heaven or not. And what I loved about Torchwood Soho Ascension is that this feels like a spiritual successor to Children of Earth and Miracle Day, where the plot is not so much here is the conceit, here's the premise, but also what is the international government and political response to things like this. Like, if all of a sudden these religious ceremonies were happening across the country where people seem to apparently actually go to heaven based on the strength of their own belief, what is the international response? What does the government do? Does it try and harness this power? What is going on behind the scenes politically? How do they operate political campaigns for it? And that's the fascinating world building that's prevalent throughout all of Torchwood Soho Ascension, including but not limited to Norton Folgate, along with Gideon, trying to figure out if there is like an extraterrestrial element here. Like, is it a warning shot? Is it a benevolent alien force? Is it another dimensional being or something? They just don't know at this point in the story. But let's play a quick clip from Torchwood Soho Ascension.
The world ends on Tuesday, in a cascade of fire and the burning screams of the damned.
Tuesday? It's just Lisbeth's little tabernacle had the end of the world down as last Wednesday. It shifted a little.
What, with the world still being here?
Yes. I wonder when Andrew's Welsh prophet thinks the apocalypse is. The world can't end on 3 different days.
Do you think the world is ending? And if so, how do these people know?
Well, God could have told them.
Seriously?
You can tell my father is a vicar.
I've never met him.
Also, if there is something out there, perhaps an alien race trying to warn the human race of imminent catastrophe, and their method of communication is telepathy or psychic projection or something.
So these people could be picking up on the signals?
And not quite translating them right. After all, do these aliens even know what Wednesday is? Hard enough concept for me to grasp. Impossible for an alien.
Like when you're standing on the beach and you can tell from the wind in the palm trees and the smell in the air that a storm's coming. Not when, but soon.
Exactly. I mean, my experience is a little more Cotswoldy, but yes.
I've never been to the Cotswolds, where your parents are.
And where they'll stay. I think there's a signal coming at us from the darkness. I've tried using Torchwood's equipment, and I'm getting nothing beyond a hum that could just be background radiation. We've a listening station in Goonhilly, but no need. I believe that various people on the planet are naturally receptive.
And that's why you sent us following these adverts. We're triangulating the signal.
Exactly.
And you made us think it was our idea.
Obviously.
Never change.
Earlier when I reviewed The Seventh Doctor, The Last Day Part 2, I really wanted to emphasize that the fact that I didn't know who these characters were, what their dynamics was, or the previous stories, that wasn't the main reason that I disliked that box set, and I really like to point to Torchwood Soho Ascension as sort of like the counter to that, where I don't know these characters. I've only heard Norton in like a previous Torchwood story, The Ascension of Catherine, which was the monthly range release from a couple of months ago. That was like my first exposure to the character, and for those asking in the comments, this is not like PC Andy's great-grandfather. This is the actual PC Andy from the Torchwood TV series, played by Tom Price, who has been zapped back to the 1950s and is essentially being held hostage here by Norton Folgate. So he's part of the team, but he's the only character that I know. I don't know anybody else in the story. However, the story itself and the world building and the character relationships were so interesting and intricate and complex and so multifaceted that I just adored this story from like beginning to end. Sarah in the chat says, I really wish I had enough money to follow these. I will say, maybe, you know, your enjoyment is improved by listening to The Unbegotten or As Ashendon or Parasite or whatever. But for me, I was just able to appreciate this as a stellar 3-hour block of sci-fi. It's split up into 6 parts, 6 half-hour parts. There are some terrific cliffhangers, but essentially I'm just treating this as one big 3-hour story, because that's really what this is, and it's really intricately layered and detailed. There's a couple of nitpicks here where I don't really know who Lisbeth is. Like, I don't know what her dynamic is with the rest of the team, because she spends an awful lot of time like away from the main action. I don't know if she's actually the leader of Torchwood. Is it her or is it Norton? But that's not the box set's issue. That's just me not really knowing these characters. And in terms of the actual story itself of the ascensions of Father Dinsdale's really tragic story arc over the course of these 3 hours, it's really, really like a sight to behold. Jamie Barhan, who voices Father Dinsdale, really is like the MVP of this set. This really like this very tragic figure who carries an incredibly heavy burden. And unfortunately, Jamie Barhan passed away like 2 weeks after this box set was released, but he's really stellar in this. Is one of his final performances as somebody who is able to allow others to ascend, but he is always left behind, and maybe he's losing his own faith and his own faith is shaken, but as long as other people have their own faith, they're able to ascend. But what are they ascending to? And when it's revealed later on, like what the aftermath is of these ascensions and how the government gets involved, you know that scene in Children of Earth where Nicholas Briggs is one of the MPs, and like they're talking about how best to deal with the 4, 5, 6's sacrifices. Like, okay, let's get all of the unqualified children. Let's get the children from broken homes or like from who are performing badly academically. Let's prioritize getting them in front of the 4, 5, 6, and you know let's leave the rich and the famous children. Like that really sort of dark, dry political commentary that happens multiple times in Ascension, and it's so harrowing whenever it does happen. It's like, it's one of those things where it's like it's not so much like a Torchwood story, it's just like incredibly strong sci-fi with a religious bent to it. And I thought that was so fascinating to watch this unfold in this really methodically paced story, which, because it almost reminded me a little bit of manga, where like, because there needs to be a cliffhanger ending at the end of every chapter, the story has a really interesting like ebb and flow to it pacing wise. Like, if this had just been like 3-hour-long stories, it might not have felt as intense as it actually does, because it has to build to these cliffhangers every half an hour. But I think that's sort of the benefit to the pacing, and James Goss is able to make this structure really, really work in the story's favor without sacrificing any of the intricate character beats. Like, I love what Gideon goes through over the course of the story. He's, from what I can understand, he's also like a member of Torchwood, but he's also a journalist, so he's able to do some investigating on his own. And there's this really interesting like racial undercurrent during one of his subplots as well, which is never really drawn attention to, but it's clear that's kind of what's happening here as well, and how the information that he is privy to as a journalist when researching these ascensions and what the government is doing about them causes him to basically just rely on drink It's really like grounded, but quite heartbreaking as well. And of course, you've got PC Andy kind of grounding the whole Enterprise as what he's not like a hapless character. He's really good at what he does, but like he's kind of like he's simultaneously overqualified and underqualified. He's a really interesting presence to have in a story like this. It's really interesting. This is a brilliant story. I loved it from beginning to end, and it has made me want to dive into the previous Soho box sets to know if they're as good as this one, because Ascension is like one of, if not my favorite Big Finish box set of 2024 so far, and I'm incredibly grateful that a story this strong was my introduction to this broader cast of characters that James Goss and the Big Finish creatives have created to broaden the Torchwood universe. It's really fascinating. I love it so much. This is really, really strong. And for those of you wondering, should I pick up the previous ones? I can't tell you that. I don't know. I've not listened to them. But I was able to listen to this with no prerequisite. I listened to this with no knowledge of these characters or the broader Torchwood Soho universe, and I still adored it.